Hello, and welcome to Lesson 2, the case study in the role-specific application. So for our agenda, we're going to break down a basic introduction to this scenario. Then we're going to actually show you the scenario itself, and then we're going to um, break down some critical thinking or discussion questions at the end with a conclusion to follow. All right? So this is the loss of judgment, the overconfident instructor, and the hard lesson. In this case, I want you to be in the mindset of a certified flight instructor. And we have to remember that as a certified flight instructor, we are not just teaching people how to fly, we're actually teaching them how to think. And it becomes more common than not that as experienced CFIs, as they grow in their hours, they become overly confident and fall into the same pitfalls as their students do. Things like overconfidence, fatigue, poor communication are very real dangerous threats that we don't see but can cause threats to the safety of the flight. So in this lesson, we're going to examine a hypothetical situation under a real-world scenario of which human factors cause an accident that could have been easily prevented. And then we're going to connect a few of those FAA human factors, and under the biblical lens of servant leadership, how we could have used it as a practical form to make better decision making. Okay. So in this case, it's a beautiful fall afternoon, and you are a brand new hired CFI, and as part of your standardization class, you were tasked to fly under a seasoned CFI by backseating his flight. In this case, it's actually weather starts to roll in under IMC conditions, and the instructor flies a student under IFR rules, of which then once you take off, the student tells the instructor, hey, I'm not really feeling comfortable do actual approaches under IFR conditions, which then the instructor immediately dismisses the student's claims and states to the student, well, we're up here now. I'm not turning back. I have over 1,200 hours, and I can perform any approach regardless of weather, and I've never had an accident. And you're watching this all from the back seat. During this, he tells the student to, prepare for all the approaches, but you realize and you notice that the student's skills start to degrade as he's flying. He's not able to keep CDI center. He keeps losing the glide slope, flying above or below. And in this case, the student finally tells the instructor again, sir, I don't feel well. I want to go back. Of which then the seasoned instructor, grabs the controls angrily and unknowingly losing his situational awareness of where he is, descends below the glide slope during the approach and causes the aircraft to actually land hard, forcing the landing gear to collapse. Everyone's okay in this scenario, but during the investigation, they find that said instructor had over 5 flights that day, each over an hour and 45 minutes, and had only 5 hours of sleep the night prior. So let's look at some of the human factors involved. The first one is the hazardous attitudes that he exemplified were macho and invulnerability. He stated things like, I can handle it. I've done it. I can do approaches in any weather. He also states, I've never had an accident. I have over 1,200 hours, never had an accident, right? Again, we mentioned this is a common incident that can happen with instructors where they become overly confident in their abilities, especially in high time. His overconfidence eroded his judgment, which then he prioritized his pride over procedure. When it came to communication and situational awareness, there was a clear breakdown of communication because he dismissed the student's concerns not once, but twice. And in CRM, the model tells us to have open dialogue between us and the entire crew so that everyone can participate. That was obviously not something that was happening in that moment. And because of that, that caused a lack of mutual respect, and the improper usage of CRM led to a huge accident, whereas if he would have had mutual respect and have utilized CRM properly, it could have ended differently. And then because of that, his emotions took over, in which then he took control and unknowingly lost situational awareness, causing the accident itself, right? And if we look at things like the fatigue and the ethical decision making, he worked a very long day. He had 5 flights that I mentioned were over an hour and 45 minutes each, or well, 4, and then this was his 5th. This caused him to not only have a silent degrade of his performance, but physically he became less alert and had an increase in response time. Whereas ethically, this lowered his ability to make safe decisions as an instructor. And because he flew all those additional flights and that lack of sleep, this degraded the safety of the flight, which was a scenario here. And we all know that he could have easily have taken care of those hazardous attitudes if he would have just put in the proper antidotes. As we can see here on the left side, he should have, for Macho, recognized that taking this extra flight was foolish, and he also should have recognized that um, um, he was exemplifying invulnerability, right? He thought it could never happen to him when he should have recognized it could have. So he shouldn't have done the flight in the beginning. In a biblical lens, he should have exemplified servant leadership through Philippians, recognizing that in humanity, valuing of others above ourselves. What he should have done is he should have prioritized the student's comfort and safety over his personal ego. He should have, the moment that student said, I didn't feel safe, he should have taken the controls and said, okay, well then how about we head back, I'll perform the approach, and we can do a ground lesson instead, is what he should have done. And Christ's motto is we should not lead by authority, but we need to lead by empathy, awareness, and restraint. So even though he recognized he couldn't get that extra flight in for that day, whether it be because of the progress of the student, it may have affected the progress of the student, or maybe the ability to get all the hours he wanted in that day, he still should have showed restraint, not to let his emotions take over, and he should have put the student first. That's what he should have done, but that wasn't the case. So with this being said, some of the critical questions I want to ask you guys is which has attitudes were most apparent? I stated that it was macho and invulnerability, but I'm curious what you guys think and how did it influence the instructor's decision making? Okay, and if the instructor would have maintained servant leadership mindset, how could his tone of communication have been different? And what were some of the visible early signs of fatigue, and how could it have been mitigated? And how could the instructor have balanced confidence and humility to overcome his confidence within the lesson? And lastly, if you were in the student's position, how could you have restrained concerns to the instructor or raised your concerns to the instructor? In conclusion, we recognize that hazardous attitudes like fatigue and communication can lead to a major risk and even the most simplest of operations. And safety depends as much on character as it does on competence. And we also know that the FAA human factors principles and biblical integration of humility and servant leadership transform not only technical supervision, but it turns it to a more of a moral stewardship. And we have to recognize that ethical instructors model self-control. They listen prior to acting, and they hold each lesson as a shared responsibility of life and learning. And with that being said, I appreciate you guys taking part of my lesson. Thank you.